This is Frankie S. Coburn, who's going to be presenting the unique flora of the Prescott region, progress and highlights. So Frankie Coburn grew up in Prescott. He started undergrad at Yavapai College and NAU, where he was inspired to study botany and plant ecology. Went on to ASU, where he received an MS and conducted a flora of the Upper Verde River. Now he is an independent consultant working throughout the southwestern US and Southern California with consulting firms, nonprofits, universities, and federal agencies. He's currently conducting ongoing rare plant surveys and monitoring in the southwestern deserts and the Southern California coast, and also riparian plant ecology and floristics with the US Forest Service in the canyons of Coconino National Forest wilderness areas. So thank you so much, Frankie. We look forward to learning more about the wonderful wildlife in Prescott.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everybody. Okay, thanks for the introduction, Lisa. And yeah, so as Lisa said, I'm an independent consultant now. A lot of my background is doing botany in the Southwest, throughout the Southwest, and now I work a lot throughout the Mojave and Sonoran deserts and along the coast of California. But I grew up in the Prescott area, and it's my hometown. And I'm still based out of there. And so whenever I'm there, I'm trying to document plants as much as possible. I'm still doing collecting in the area and documenting through iNaturalist. And out of all the places that I've been and that I travel and I do botany, I think that, you know, the Prescott area is just really unique. There's still a ton to be discovered there. I feel like it's a really undiscovered, underexplored area botanically in our state. And so I just wanted to present some of the findings, some of the things that I thought were really interesting about the Prescott flora that I've been finding over the last 5 or 6 years that I've been trying to study the area. And so most of you will probably know that Prescott is a very historic area. And there's a deep history starting with, you know, native indigenous tribes, Prescott culture, they call them, related to the Hohokam and probably some relations to the Puebloans. And then through history, you know, the Hopi were throughout that area, or the Yavapai and the Apache. And then later on, of course, the settlers came in, and, you know, this is what a lot of people know about the Prescott area, the intense mining that occurred throughout the mountains. Prescott was first settled as a mining town, then it became the territorial capital. And so there's a lot of human history in the Prescott area, a lot of deep history. But all along, there has existed a unique and diverse plant community, you know, ecosystems throughout the wilderness surrounding the Prescott area. They've been there all along. And so just to kind of put the Prescott area into context, you can see that Prescott is kind of at the northwest terminus of this transition zone area in the Southwest. And so the area is in the Mogollon or Central Highlands, they call it, or the transition zone or Central Highlands physiographic province. So it's a transition zone between the Colorado Plateau and the Basin and Range in the Sonoran Desert to the south. And the biology is, it's highly diverse, and part of the reason is because it lies in between these two physiographic provinces. And so you have not only species from the Colorado Plateau, because each one of these areas has unique floras and unique fauna, And so the transition zone kind of has elements of both of those provinces, but also has a really unique, diverse, suite of ecosystems on its own and species that are endemic to this transition zone. This is the Mogollon Highlands from this poster from Griffith et al. 2014. The Mogollon Highlands extend down into New Mexico and contain several different plant communities that are unique to this transition zone. And you can see how these two, the biotic communities and the transition zone, correlate there. And one thing I really want to emphasize throughout this talk, while I kind of lead you on a journey through the Prescott Flora, is that it's at this western terminus of this ecoregion that really extends from Mexico. And so you have the Sierra Madre mountains that come up into the Skylands in southeastern Arizona from Mexico. And this set of highlands extends west until around the Prescott area, and I think the Hualapai Mountains are probably the most western extent of a lot of these, of this plant, this floristic province of the Central Highlands. And also, so it provides kind of a high elevation stepping stone leading up from Mexico, a series of stepping stones. And you can see that monsoon patterns from this map below shows that higher amounts of precipitation lead up into these highlands areas. And you can see that the flow of monsoonal moisture flows up into those highlands. And so, like I said, it provides a series of stepping stones for plants and animals really to reach up into North America. And the Prescott region really lies at the furthest west and northwest of this Madrean Mexican biodiversity coming up from Mexico. And so, as I said, Mogollon Highlands are really a special region in the Southwest. They're very diverse. The geology is very diverse. Part of this is because of the geology and because of those precipitation patterns that I mentioned. And so there's several, a lot of different endemic plants and animals that only occur along these Central Highlands. And really, as I talk about the Prescott Flora, I'm really highlighting this Central Highlands, Mogollon Mountains biodiversity that extends up from Mexico. It's really unique to this ecoregion. And so, as I said, Prescott is up here. It kind of lies at the western terminus. So as we go through looking at the plant species of the region, you'll see that a lot of them reach their range limits in the Prescott area and perhaps a little bit further west, but it's a pretty strong barrier or boundary of this ecoregion. And so here's a map of the Prescott area, and what's outlined in green is the National Forest, Prescott National Forest. And so there's just a vast wilderness surrounding the area, and a lot of botanists have been here and biologists have done research, but it's just such a vast wilderness that a lot of it is pretty inaccessible, or at least hard to get to. And so it's just a lot of area to explore and a lot to be discovered, really, still to this day. So the National Forest covers over 1.25 million acres, the Prescott National Forest. So it's just a humongous area of open wilderness. And so as I've gotten interested in kind of summarizing and realizing that the Prescott region's really unexplored botanically, or underexplored, I should say, botanically, I started to think that, this special flora should probably be summarized, and I'm hoping that by putting together a checklist and really summarizing and then starting to highlight then the diversity and the the interesting aspects of this flora, that hopefully I can collaborate with others and get together with others that have been doing work in the area. And so I defined this as the Prescott region, leading almost up to Seligman, down south to the mountains, south of Prescott and Crown King, Peoples Valley, and kind of including this area as the Campwood and Santa Maria Mountains, over here the Black Hills and Mingus Mountain. And so it's defined by kind of the physiography. This is all really solid Central Highlands, but also by elevation. So it's mostly higher than about 4,500 feet. And I've started a checklist on SciNet, and it's a working checklist. I'm starting to go through the taxonomy and see, what names look good and what names don't look good, and et cetera. And it's up to around 2,150 distinct taxa. So it's highly diverse in both ecosystems and species. And you can see that over time, there's been quite a few collections. You can see the years down here in the x-axis, and you can see that in the middle part of the last century, the 1900s, that there was quite a few collections there, and then into the early 2000s or late 90s. And so, yeah, starting in the 1800s, Elliott Coues, a lot of botanists have visited the Prescott area. It's definitely not lacking in collections, but it's just under collected because it's such a vast area. Elliott Coues came to the Prescott area in the 1800s and was one of the first collectors to collect plants around Prescott. Delzy Desmarais also came to the Prescott area in the early 1900s. The famous prolific collector explored the area. And then in the 60s, as a part of Eleanor Lido and David Keel and Dr. Donald Pinkava, they did a lot of exploration all over Arizona and collected plants, and they definitely collected a lot in the Prescott area. In fact, a lot of, a majority of collections in the 1900s were done by them. And then in the 90s, Mark Baker did quite a few floras in the area, contracted by the Forest Service, and made a ton of collections throughout the Prescott area, and really contributed to our knowledge of the flora in that area. And that happened here in the 90s. And as you can see, after Mark went elsewhere to collect and do his thing, that the collection somewhat fell off, but in the last couple decades, there's been some collectors. Sue Smith has been collecting in the area and has been maintaining the Yavapai Cooperative Extension website list of plants. So we're still paying attention to the plants in the area, but we could definitely use more attention in the Prescott region. So here's a definition of the Prescott region again, and I want to take you on a journey of the ecosystems that we have in the area. And so I kind of simplified it by dividing it into 3 different general ecosystem types, or biotic community types that have a lot of different communities that are subsets underneath these. So starting in the north, you have these hills that are limestone. They're not actually limestone, they're mostly dolostone, which is a magnesium-rich form of limestone. The Martin Formation dolostone, which is a marine deposited dolostone. And so this kind of covers this northern area of the Prescott region. And there's a lot of interesting plants, endemics there. And then you have these huge swaths of grasslands that are kind of a mix of grasses from different regions. You have prairie grasses, you have desert grassland species that all kind of intermingle in these grasslands that cover a pretty large area. The largest area is covered by the pine oak, and I just lumped a bunch of different communities together in this just to give you an idea of where these communities are located. And I'll take you on a journey through these, and we'll check out some of the cool and interesting species that grow in each one of them. So starting up in the limestone hills, limestone and dolostone host really unique communities. I think anybody who's been in the field and these types of habitats knows the unique plants that can grow on limestone and dolostone. And so this limestone community is kind of a mix of Madrean and Chihuahuan scrub communities. So actually a lot of species from the Chihuahuan Desert actually reach their most northern extent in this area. And then you have several other species that are, from more common on the Colorado Plateau. So the limestone really hosts kind of a mix of different species from different regions. It's a eclectic flora. Common species you'll run into are Dahlia formosa, the shrub dahlia that you see a lot in southeastern Arizona and throughout the Central Highlands. Aloysia wrightii, it's a common encounter. Glossopetalon spinescens seems to be pretty specific to limestone and calcareous soils, and you'll run into this one. Some other showy species, including Penstemon thomsoniae. There's a lot of these low-growing plants that grow on this limestone and dolostone. They've adapted to these harsh soil conditions with very thick roots, a low growing habit, and the ability to tolerate soils low in nitrate and other nutrients. On the limestone, there's a lot of rare and endemic and disjunct species. One that Anita just mentioned a little bit ago, Salvia dorii, subspecies mearnsii, is endemic to limestone in the Verde Valley and in this area north of Prescott and Paulden. Linanthus watsonii was collected by Mark Baker out there. It's a disjunct from the Colorado Plateau, so it's more common in central and northern Utah, with just a couple isolated populations on this limestone north of Prescott. Rhinotropis or Polygala ruspii is a showy little plant that grows on the limestone that's endemic to central Arizona, that's rare and is pretty specific to these soils. It grows a little bit on calcareous sandstone, but it's pretty specific to this habitat. And then Hexalectris arizonica, this orchid, was collected by Mark Baker in the Juniper Mountains, which are kind of up here in the very northern part of this Prescott region. And Mark collected it in one locality. But, this is a really good example of a little plant that I think could really be easily missed. And so, I'm not familiar if there has been any survey since Mark found it out there, but this is an example of a species that it's probably been missed. It's probably more common out there, but the fact that the area is just really underexplored we only know of this one locality in northern Arizona of Hexalectris, which also occurs down in some of the Sky Islands. So very isolated, but with more exploration, you know, we can find more populations of things like the Hexalectris arizonica. Okay, and so moving into the grassland ecosystems, like I said, these are kind of a mix of prairie, of short and tall grass prairie species from, you know, middle America, basically. And then you have some desert grassland species from the south. So it's kind of an eclectic grassland, and it covers vast areas where antelope like to hang out. And so here you'll have, you know, several species of Bouteloua, Aristida, Hopia obtusa. During the monsoons, there's a lot of annuals that come up. And then the ring muley, Muhlenbergia torii, is common out there. And I think in more ungrazed areas that aren't overgrazed, you'll get pretty dense stands of this Muhlenbergia. That's a neat grass. Bouteloua hirsuta, like I said, several species of Bouteloua. In the healthier areas, you'll get really diverse stands with, you know, up to 4 or 5 species of Bouteloua. Opuntia macrorrhiza, the large rooted prickly pear, occurs out, seems to be pretty happy out in these grasslands. Asclepias involucrata is an undercollected species up there, but you know, there's just a couple collections in these grasslands, but I've observed it all over the place. I mean, it is common in the spring all over these grasslands, and really seems to prefer that habitat, these open, flat, you know, maybe soils with a little bit more silt in them. Androstephium breviflorum. So you have some geophytes out here that, you know, hide out when there's snow covering the ground all during the winter, or when it dries out, and then you have a good spring, and man, these things pop up, and they can be pretty common. Same with Escobaria missouriensis, this little hiding Escobaria that's, you know, during a drought, you won't even see it. It'll just tuck itself at ground level or below the ground. But then you get some good rains, and you just have these little flowers that are popping up everywhere, and you have to kind of look where you step, because they'll be all over the place in some areas. You know, just popping out these little flowers almost straight out of the ground, it seems. So that's a really cool species. And this one, Escobaria missouriensis, is also more common on the Colorado Plateau, and the populations in the Prescott area are disjunct. It's a rare plant in this region, at least. And I think it has a listing by NatureServe as being of concern as well. Here's some other rare plants that grow in the grasslands and the prairie around Prescott. Astragalus mollissimus var. Mogollionicus. It's a little bit more common up on the plateau, but it's pretty rare species, and it occurs in these grasslands. Stachys rothrocii is a mint that is pretty rare. You can see the distribution here, kind of along the plateau, and then with a few isolated populations, you know, up here on the Navajo reservation and into New Mexico a little bit. But it's a rare plant. I think it's listed as S3 by NatureServe, but you know, maybe it's one that we should take a closer look at. It's another one that I think is more common throughout the region that we just don't know, because the area is underexplored and not a lot of people have walked out into these grasslands and collected. So it grows on basalt, pretty specifically more recent volcanic soils in pretty dense, like clay soils that pretty much crack when they're dry. So it seems to be pretty habitat specific too. But no more exploration is needed to find out how common this thing is in the area. So moving up into Chaparral, I didn't outline this on the map, but basically the Chaparral communities in the Prescott region flank all of these mountains. And so you can go on slopes on a lot of these higher mountains where there's steep slopes, south facing, et cetera, and find pretty dense chaparral. And you'll get these manzanita forests where, I've found manzanita that were Arctostaphylos pungens specifically that were close to 10 feet tall that you could actually walk beneath. And so there's some pretty neat stands of those. But this community, with increasing catastrophic fires in the area, it seems that the ponderosa pine will burn, and then the chaparral will move in. Different species such as Cercocarpus will, these pioneers will come in and take over. And in some areas, the ponderosa pine forest hasn't came back. So immediately surrounding the Prescott area, there's places where, we grew up where there was ponderosa pine forest, and now it's just pure chaparral after fires. So that's really kind of a change that we've seen before our eyes in the last couple decades, is that conversion to chaparral in many of those burned areas. So moving up into the Pine Oak Mountains. So like I said, I kind of lumped all these together, and I'm gonna go through some subsets of these Pine Oak Mountains, but essentially it's the higher elevations, the mountains, and the foothills that have either ponderosa pine, mixed conifer, or oak woodlands. And so this is truly where you get to see this connection with Mexico and the Sierra Madre is in these communities, because this is part of the stepping stone of islands, essentially, biological islands that creep up from Mexico in these higher elevations. So I really want to kind of highlight the Mexican connection that we have up here in the Prescott area. And so, like I said, there's several different series: ponderosa pine, gamble oak in the higher elevations, pinyon juniper lower down, and then the community that I really like to explore is the Madrean oak woodlands in the foothills. I'll talk about all those. So starting in the high mountains, you have ponderosa pine and mixed conifer, and a lot of this geology is actually of old volcanic origin. And so there was some uplifts and some tectonic movement that occurred, and a lot of old volcanoes that covered the area with basalt, and more uplift occurred. And then you have kind of these rocky mountains. Many of them are really steep gradient with a lot of basalt. And this is perhaps the most undercollected region, reaching down from Prescott down to Crown King. It's really remote. And so I think a lot more exploration could be done in this area, and there could be a lot of discoveries lurking out there. So some of the rare and endemic plants that occur in these high mountains are the Heuchera eastwoodii, the Senator Mine alum root. So Senator Mine is a mine that's just north of or south of Prescott in the Bradshaw Mountains. And so this alum root was named for that area, for that mine, because it was first described in that area. Oxalis alpina is a rare oxalis that grows in the high mountains. Also occurs up around Flagstaff along the Mogollon Rim as well. and same with Draba asperella, which it's listed as rare, and there's populations around the Prescott Mountains and then up in the Flagstaff area. And so that's another one. I think the taxonomy is kind of wonky with that one. And so there might be some more work that needs to be done to show exactly, if the different subspecies distributions. It seems there's a subspecies directly around the Prescott area that might be endemic to that area. So some more of these rare plants in the high mountains. And then coming out of the mountains in the Prescott region, there's a lot of streams. Most of these are headwater streams up in mountains that are high gradient, rocky creeks mostly, and washes that drain down in some larger creeks, such as Granite Creek, that eventually drain into the headwaters of the Verde River. But it's mostly these high gradient headwater streams. And so the plants often reflect that with Arizona alder and pretty nice cottonwood willow forests, and various species of carex and juncus. And again, a lot of diversity up there that probably needs to be looked at closer. I know that Max Leiker and Glenn Rink have done some exploration up there and kind of are sorting out some of the carex and juncus in the Bradshaw Mountains. I think there's a couple of rare ones up there too. So Lupinus latifolia this is another one where the taxonomy is a little bit, there's not a lot of conclusions with the taxonomy, but it appears that there's a plant, Lupinus, that grows in the riparian areas around Prescott that's rare, and it's been called under various varieties of latifolia, and then it's also been called Lupinus parishii as well. But it's a rare plant that only occurs in the mountains around Prescott, and then I think a little bit further down into the central highlands. And then Alnus oblongifolia is just a really special tree. This is endemic and specific to the central highlands, the central Mogollon, the Mogollon Highlands, and down into the Sierra Madre of Mexico. And so this is where it occurs. It's endemic to this region, but it is one of the most important species in our riparian areas. Always has to have its feet wet. It needs a lot of water. It might be the most, or one of the most sensitive species to water decline in the Southwest. As soon as that stream, the water table goes down just a little bit, these things will die off. And so it's really important, abundant species and really sensitive too. So now I want to move down into the foothills of the mountains around Prescott. And this is really one of my favorite communities. Well, it's quite a few different communities, but it's really one of my favorite areas to explore because I just keep making discoveries in these areas. And so these are these granite landscapes made up of various formations of granite and granodiorite, a form of granite. Very, very old rock. I mean, these rocks are, very, very old. And I'll take you on a journey through those. And so in the Granitic Foothills, one of the most important plant communities is this Quercus emeryi, so the Emory Oak woodlands. Emory Oak woodlands really reach their western range limit in the Prescott area. And so you still have Emory Oak forests as you'd see down in southeastern Arizona and Mexico and the Sierra Madre. This is a distribution map of Quercus emeryi. But in the Prescott area, you really still get these well-developed forests and savannas of Quercus emeryi. And so it's a really unique plant community. It's very special. One of the series underneath the Quercus emeryi woodlands is listed as vulnerable by NatureServe. Some of the common species you'll have are single leaf pinyon, alligator juniper, and pretty diverse understory of different shrubs, often with chaparral shrubs kind of mixing in there. So you have this kind of mix of grassland, oak woodland, and chaparral happening there. But super interesting. So during the spring, you can go out in these granite formations and you'll have these ephemeral wet areas that are wet for months on end during the winter. I suspect that a lot of these plants probably have a C3 photosynthetic pathway. They're able to pop up during the winter, maybe even when there's still snow, and start to kind of take over these seasonally wet areas. So you have species like Plectridis ciliosa, that's really undercollected in the area, but is more common, and it's undercollected in Arizona in general, but is more common in other states. Lewissia brachycalyx is a rare species listed by NatureServe. Myosurus cupulatus, and different little monkey flowers. And then one of the most interesting discoveries I made a couple years back was I found this little tiny juncus. I was just crawling around on my hands and knees. A lot of these plants are belly plants. So these little ephemeral wetlands just kind of form this, prolific areas of just annuals and perennials coming up in kind of thick stands. But a lot of them are teeny tiny. And so I'm crawling around on my hands and knees and I see this tiny little thing and I couldn't even tell what it was at first. And I looked closer at it with my hand lens and I realized, oh, it's a juncus. And I remembered Glenn Rink had told me about this little juncus to be on the lookout for. And I swear, like a week after he told me that, I was out there crawling around and I find this little juncus and I'm like, holy, and I sent a picture of it to Glenn and he's like, sure enough, that's Juncus bryoides. And so this is nearly a state record. Turns out Mark Baker had collected it a little bit further northwest back in the 90s. And then I think Walt Fertig had collected it in very northern Arizona. But then I found this population right outside of Prescott. It's another plant that I suspect is a lot more common than we know. It's just, you have to be out there. This thing literally comes up and then as soon as it dries out for like a week, it like disappears. And so these things are highly ephemeral. And I think people probably miss them a lot. I bet they're way more common than we know. We just need to explore on our bellies a little bit more to find these things. So that was a cool find.
Frankie, I just want to do a time check. We're just about at the end of your scheduled session time, and there's just a couple questions in the chat, but maybe if you can finish up your slides quickly, and then either we can have you answer the questions by typing or maybe eat into the lunch break just briefly.
Okay. I'll move through these last ones pretty quick. Okay, and so I'll just jump to this post-monsoon. I think I was talking a little, going on about those plants a little bit. So we had the spring ephemeral wetlands, and then post-monsoon, you get these monsoon meadows. So you can see several of the species that are common after monsoons. And I just really want to emphasize through these, in these granite formation landscapes, you really have this connection with the Sierra Madre, and it's really representative of the Mogollon Highlands flora. And so all of these plants follow this monsoonal pattern. And so you have just fields of Cyparis and Bulbostylus and and various other annuals that are coming up after the monsoons. Some more plants with a connection to southeastern Arizona and Mexico, Sierra Madre, Schistophragma, Thalia albiflora. And you can just see the same pattern with all these species that are really tuned to that monsoonal precipitation flow. A lot of you in southeastern Arizona and southern Arizona will recognize a lot of these species. Well, they're common up in Prescott too. That's the furthest north and west they make it. Some of them are disjunct as well, such as Carminatia. And just some more species, Galactioridae, just again, the same patterns, this connection with Mexico, plants reaching their furthest west range limits in this area. Some of them rarely collected, like Euphorbia bilobata and Physalis solanaceae. Several Myriopterous species grow in the granite boulders as well. And then you see all of these white annuals, the white stuff, the little white Caryophylls, and some other families too. But you can just walk right by them and think they're all the same species. But if you look closely at them, there's definitely some nuances there, and there's quite a bit of diversity. We have various Drymaria species in the Caryophyllaceae, Ceriastium species, and then Stenotus greenii, which is actually, you can look at the distribution of that one, and that one is actually quite rare, and maybe it's another one that needs some attention paid to it, because it's super common throughout the Prescott area, just rarely collected. And it's listed, I think this is listed as S3 by NatureServe as well, so it's listed as rare. Just want to go through one taxonomic issue that I found in the area. By the way, a lot of, so I mentioned that I've been making collections, but I've been doing a lot on iNaturalist too, making hundreds of observations on iNaturalist, talking with other experts, etc. And this is one issue that we came across, is that Drymaria leptophylla has commonly been, that name has been used for species in the Prescott area previously, but I keyed several populations to Drymaria effusa, which is a much more rare species. But then I started finding populations with mixed characters of both, having to do with calyx shape and the petals relative to the calyx. So this is a taxonomic issue. Which one is it? Or is it both? Or do they hybridize? Is this a zone where they meet up? They seem to be semi-sympatric, but perhaps it's just a taxonomic issue. So that's something I want to look into further. And then I've discovered several range extensions as well. Crusea diversifolia is common down in southeastern Arizona. This will be a county record from the work that I've been doing. And other species, Euphorbia cuposperma, turns out might be more common than we thought, but looks exactly like Euphorbia davidii. I think a lot of specimens have been misapplied, but it has hairier ovaries. So there's definitely a lot of, taxonomy and issues up there that just need to be looked at closer. A couple of the rare and endemic species in the area that grow in these granite formations, Echinocerius yavapiensis that Mark Baker described, Aramogene aberrans, which is a Central Arizona endemic and pretty specific to those granitic soils and outcrops. And then Dudleya sexosa subspecies columbiae. All these plants are rare, listed by NatureServe. Some of them are listed by the Forest Service and BLM, but they occur in these rocky granite landscapes. So yeah, so I just wanted to highlight some of the amazing plants in the Prescott area, and hopefully kind of whet people's appetite for, wow, that area, probably needs more exploration. I'm hoping to maybe put together some organized projects. Maybe we could do a Papaz Flora of the Granite Mountain. I've been wanting to do that for years. But there's a lot more exploration and a lot to be found in these hills. Like I said, it's a vast wilderness that it's hard to cover all the ground. It's big, so a lot to be discovered.
Unfortunately, we are out of time for verbally having you answer questions, but there are a few in the Q&A box. If you have a moment now, or perhaps a little later on, to type some answers to the folks that had typed in some questions. And then I just want to make a note before we break for lunch that the Arizona Native Plant Society did historically have a chapter in Prescott. Unfortunately, it had to go dormant just due to a lack of, I guess, folks, willing to lead the activities there, because it is a lot of work to lead a chapter, as I know. So, perhaps some of you that are watching, if you're in that region, perhaps there's maybe some folks that might be interested in regrowing that group, that chapter. But as you just said, Frankie, if not even just a possibility to participate perhaps in a plant atlas project of Arizona project in the Prescott area, I'm sure they can reach out to you. I'm not sure if your email address was on that slide you just showed, but if you could write that in the chat, if folks want to reach out to you in the Prescott area, that might be interested in getting involved with something there.
Sure, I'll write it in the chat. And yeah, please reach out if you want to come up and